be having a discussion of Romeo and Juliet. And then at 10 o'clock will be the Treasure Island discussion. There was a slight error in the announcement yesterday in the Randall, and so we're working to get that clarified. So if you're passionate about Treasure Island and you don't want to talk about Romeo and Juliet, come back in an hour. We have a few announcements to make and some people to introduce you to. We're joined here by the director of Romeo and Juliet, J.R. Sullivan. And so you are lucky. Have a seat, Jim. But before we get started with that, I'll introduce myself and then some guests we have for you to meet today. My name is Kate McPherson. I'm a professor of English at Utah Valley University, about 3 hours up the road in Orem, Utah, where I also direct the honors program. I'm very thrilled to be here at the Utah Shakespeare Festival. This is my first season as part of the company, although I've been attending here since I joined the faculty at UVU about 17 years ago. So I'm very excited to be here facilitating these discussions and, living here in Cedar and meeting all the artistic and administrative staff. It's really great. I'm also thrilled to be joined by my longtime collaborator, Kate Moncrief.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Kate Moncrief. Kate and Kate, we're easy to remember. If you shout Kate, someone's going to answer your question. So I think our shtick this summer is Kate and Kate in the morning. I'm a professor of English and the chair of the department at Washington College in Chestertown, Maryland, way on the other side of the country. But I've been lucky enough to be coming to this festival because my best friend and scholarly collaborator, Kate, lives here in Utah. So I've been seeing shows over the years. We've been collaborating since we were graduate students. We met at the Folger Shakespeare Library. We've published 3 books together, and we are editors on the Internet Shakespeare editions, if you've ever used that. We have not had the chance to do this before together, so we're really thrilled to be here in the morning with you. How many of you are first-time playgoers here?
Bunch of old hands.
Welcome. We're so glad to have you. And so everyone else, longtime playgoers, to you, welcome back, 56th season. Kate, we have one more introduction. We want to bring up a couple more people to talk for just a second, and then we're going to give you a little bit of background and information about the play, talk to the director, and then we're going to open up to your questions and comments.
Come on up. We have here with us Bob Kramer, one of the key volunteers, one of the dozens and dozens of volunteers who help the festival do what it does, and he has some things to tell you.
Can we use that mic?
Yeah. Here.
Morning, everyone. How's everybody doing? Good. How many people from Las Vegas? Great. We're also from Las Vegas, and we run a place here all summer and fundraise. We want to tell you mainly about one of our main programs that my wife Shirley and I run, and it's called Curtain Call Lunch. And the Curtain Call Lunches are held in the Alumni House just on the other side of the museum. It's a little building over there. What we do is we get 4 actors together, and it's kind of like the actor seminar, except you get lunch with it. And you can pay at the door tomorrow, or you can get your tickets today. There's a little reduction in price if you get your tickets at the box office, or you can get them online at bard.org. And tomorrow's luncheon is going to feature, of course, Quinn and Betsy, Quinn Matfield and Betsy McGovero, also Aaron Arroyo and Devin Anderson. Devin's one of the fellows from SUU. So it starts at noon, and we have a really nice buffet. Well, it's not a buffet, but a really nice lunch for you over there. And then we have a lot of fun. We get to talk to the actors. You're probably wondering what this is around my neck here. This is part of another fundraiser that Shirley and I started called Adopt an Actor. And this is a picture of John Preston right here, the wonderful John Preston, who is on fire this year. He's doing such a great job. And for a nominal fee, you can adopt an actor, you can wear his lanyard, and you can write him a note. And if he's not really, really busy, he may get together with you, and a lot of people do get together with you for lunch or for coffee or something or other. And it's just another thing we do here at the festival that's kind of unique in getting the actors and the patrons together. And this is a wonderful thing about this festival, as far as I'm concerned, that the actors are so accessible and that we can talk to them. Another thing we do is if you have a business, last year we started a business program and signed up a whole bunch of the local businesses around here. Amazingly enough, a lot of the new businesses didn't even know this festival was here. So what we did is we brought in brochures, we brought in schedules, we signed them up, and now they're coming to the festival. So just a cooperative effort, and the volunteers around here really, really work hard and are dedicated to this festival. So please join us for the curtain call lunch tomorrow at noon. Get your tickets at the box office at bard.org if you want to get them online, or you can walk over if you decide at the last minute to go. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. And a special welcome, as always, to those of you who are already donors to the festival, who are members. And so we're really glad everyone is here. And we're really excited to be talking about Romeo and Juliet. And we have the priceless resource here this morning of Jim Sullivan. We're going to get started. Kate's going to give just a teeny bit of background about the play. And then we will turn to some general questions for Jim. And then we'll pitch it out to you for your questions and observations and ideas about last night's performance.
Great. So Romeo and Juliet, how many of you have seen this play before? Right. So absolutely. For Shakespeare's audience, this also would have been a really, really familiar story. Shakespeare, we don't have the exact date of composition, but scholars date this to about 1595, right before Midsummer Night's Dream. They're composed right in the same time period. I think they're speaking, if you're seeing both of those productions, you can think about the two of those together. It's a really thoughtfully programmed season. So right about 1595. This story comes primarily from Ovid, from the Pyramus and Thisbe story, but there were many, many versions of it available to Shakespeare and to others, particularly Italian versions. The version that Shakespeare probably used most, William Paynter's Palace of Pleasure, he took a bunch of his other stories from that too, like Measure for Measure. So the fact that this is an incredibly familiar story and audiences come to it with an expectation, we're sort of in the same place as Shakespeare's audiences, that we know what to expect. So one of the things that Shakespeare does that's quite interesting is he often will use a convention, a genre, an expectation, because we're all in there together, and then he's going to take a left turn. He's going to subvert it. He's going to do something different with that particular story. One of the conventions that Shakespeare really leans on with Romeo and Juliet is the sonnet. Okay, so in the 1590s, if you were a poet, and this is what we refer to our writers, playwrights were called poets. If you were a poet trying to make a reputation for yourself and really show off your writing skills, you were writing sonnets, right? So you were showing off that particular skill. The sonnet itself is a very constricted form. You probably know this. It has 14 lines. It's written in iambic pentameter. It has a particular rhyme scheme. So a little like a musician or a jazz musician, you learn the form and then you begin to riff on it. So that's a little bit what Shakespeare does here. He, in fact, starts us with the sonnet, the prologue, two households both alike in dignity in fair Verona, where we lay our scene, is a sonnet. He uses other conventions from the sonnet. The sonnet was developed in Italy by Petrarch. And Petrarch's story, this is going to sound really familiar, Petrarch goes to church. Across a crowded room, he sees a beautiful girl named Laura, and he falls deeply in love with her. He writes hundreds of sonnets to Laura, but Laura never returned his affections. In fact, she died. But in the sonnets form, we get this Petrarchan lover. He's melancholy. He's suffering because love is a torment, and the lady doesn't return his affections. Sound familiar? This is Romeo, right? We start with this guy in love with Rosalind. Shakespeare then, because he's Shakespeare and very, very clever, he weaves actual sonnets into the text. There are many, many sonnets woven into this story, that particular form. The most famous one is when Romeo and Juliet meet. Their lines together at the party, two pilgrims, hand to hand, holy palmer's kiss, actually forms a sonnet. So Shakespeare's playing with our expectations for the story, our expectations for the character, and our expectations for the form. Pay attention to Juliet, right? Because she's not the lady of the sonnets. She desires, she returns his affection. This is really Juliet's play. Okay, so I think that's plenty of background to let us leap off. Let's turn to Jim, to our director. And the first question I want to ask you is, many of us have a long history with these plays. We love them. We've seen them multiple times. What's your relationship to Romeo and Juliet? And then how did you come to this particular production, your ideas and your concept?
Well, good morning. This is the second time I've done the play, although the first time was almost 28 years ago. So It's been a while, and I'm different. Certainly, I certainly have a different attitude toward the parents than I did back then. Um, but I think my first experience with the story was Franco Zeffirelli's movie in the late '60s, and it just knocked me out. It just bowled me over. I felt that I was them. I felt that I understood it. It was clear to me. You know, at that time, I had the feeling that Shakespeare was just too complex and dense, and people didn't really talk like that, did they? And that was really the beginning for me for in my relationship to this work. That play just sort of vacuumed my head and of my prejudices about it, and made me realize there was such depth there and such treasures to be found, and probably had a lot to do with my going into theater then. So that's where it began for me. And I think also the richness of these stories, as you know, because you see them often and find new things, perhaps each time you see the play, any of his plays, if you see them many times, some new element may emerge. And that's an astonishing thing for me always about his work. You think you know them, and all of a sudden some new gem emerges about it, and or some new truth, or you were in a place to receive that truth that you weren't before. So I always feel like I'm growing in my life when I'm present with these plays, and it's such a great privilege to work on them to this depth with this production support. With so many actors who are so competent and a full, you know, the design team that's here, it's just such a joy for me, for an artist, and I expect for you too because you're here. So that's my background with it.
We were talking with Brian Vaughn yesterday, and he made a similar comment about he has a lot of sympathy for the parents now that he is the father of 3 daughters. And Kate, you'd said the same thing, that scene
Totally.
with the Capulets resonated in really different ways. I thought it was brilliantly done in this production, and I had so much sympathy for the Capulets there. But we come to these plays as different people in different phases of our lives.
Yes, right, and you understand. I mean, I think or certainly before I thought of the Capulets as part among the antagonists to the story, to them, and perhaps shortchanged them as far as their completion on stage, their fullness, their complete humanity. But that's also the thing about Shakespeare, isn't it? I mean, the minutia of the human heart, as another poet said. He just continually gives us a whole world, and even the smallest characters come in and come out with a full life, you know, that intersects with the story at this point. So that has something to do with it for me.
Can you talk with us a little bit about, I mean, there's always contrasting Montague and Capulet visually, you know, verbally. The play gives you that contrast between them. Can you talk to us about how your team approached that contrast?
Yeah, we thought that we'd never hear why there's a feud. You know, there's just this ancient grudge, an ancient enmity. But we thought the design, Bill Black, this brilliant costume designer, we developed a notion about the Montagues being old money in town and the Capulets being of the rising merchant class, and much more ostentatious in their display of it, which was a kind of annoyance, you know, to the others. And that, of course, is what the play can support, because you don't see much of the Montagues in the play. But you see a lot of the Capulets, and you see the Capulet home, and you see the Capulet ball, you know, the servants. So that seems to be a little chaotic
That
in
was
this
some
household.
feast they were having with the peacock on the table.
Yeah, we wanted to overload the table with a display of their success. You know, they're conspicuous consumers.
Even to the extent I was noticing last night after you'd mentioned this to us in our last seminar, it's the Capulet servants who wear a logo on their doublets, right? And the Montague servants are just dressed very quietly. It's all very sedate and more staid. It's more dignified. Whereas you said, as the Capulets, it's very opulent. It's not ostentatious quite, but almost.
Yes, yeah, they've got it and they flaunt it.
And the you know, Lord Capulet's eagerness to throw these enormous parties, and then with the wedding celebrations and stuff, it's all right there in the text. But I thought that was something I guess I'd never really stopped to think about very hard before, even though I've taught and read this play at least a dozen times and seen productions of it that many times as well.
Even the women at the party, to Paris in the first scene, he talks to them as if they were a display of value and wealth. You know, my daughter among all the rest. So that's a way of thinking, a mercantile, even capitalistic way of thinking that we thought had a role in the story.
Although it's very interesting, of course, at the end of the play, it's Montague who makes this very intensely expensive gesture of respect to the Capulet family, right? He's going to raise a statue all in gold to Juliet to commemorate her life.
Isn't that brilliant, that moment? Even though they're coming together, they're still a little competitive. I'll do this. Well, I'll do this. Well, I'll do this. There's still that touch of, competition. That's
Jim, could you talk a little bit about working in this beautiful space? Romeo and Juliet probably premiered at the Rose Theater, Henslow's company. For those of you who saw Romeo and Juliet or saw Shakespeare in Love, right? The Rose opened in 1587. The Globe didn't open until 1599. So this play opens. It was either at the Rose or the Curtain, I think. So we have an Elizabethan theater here. Could you talk about these staging conditions and some of the challenges and opportunities those provided for you for this play?
Well, there's a dramatic architecture to the play, certainly in a literature sense, but also in a staging sense. And of course, they only existed then to be played. As you all know, publishing these plays happened much later, and never by Shakespeare himself. He didn't seem to be much concerned about that. Although I think he did correct the what they called a bad quarto, they think, of this play. Mostly, probably goes out of pride to think this lousy version was circulating, and it wasn't the one
It's
I
like
wrote.
a pirated music video
Well, and
circulating.
here's a weird little tidbit for those of you who saw Shakespeare in Love as well. This bad quarto that was published in 1597, one of the publishers of the quarto was Henry Chettle. You'll hear that name in Shakespeare in Love, that Shakespeare's going to be one of the greats along with Henry Chettle. There's a funny little
Yes.
correspondence there.
So the plays have a structure. It was written for a platform, and they had costumes, usually supplied by themselves, but not the sort of scenic support, and certainly not lighting, which is why you also get a lot of light cues in the writing. I think Romeo and Juliet and Macbeth both have the most light cues within the text. What light from yonder window breaks, et cetera, et cetera. And all this was in the afternoon for them. So the language is giving them the scenic design in light. But the entrances and exits are very clearly written for a stage that has something left, something right, something above, and something below. And even to an extent of a trap, as well as the above, because for the Elizabethans, that was a platform stuck out between heaven and hell, upon which we poor mortals enacted the stories of our lives. And that's an aesthetic that you see over and over in these works, especially in the works from the early 1590s until about the early 1600s, when more and more things began to happen inside in smaller theaters. So this stage, of course, is a replica of that. A unit setting for all the plays supports the Shakespeare work. And it's wonderful that it's this for the Shakespeare in Love, because it does replicate that Rose Theater experience from backstage as well. And our design had to do with a unit setting that because of the Shakespeare in Love, Romeo and Juliet pairing in this particular season, we framed it as Romeo and Juliet from an Elizabethan point of view, which is why the chorus, who ascends the stage from the audience itself, us, relates to the space as the frame for looking back to the High Renaissance, 1515 or 1520 in Verona, and is costumed accordingly, adding pieces of costume to step into and out of the play. And that was our framing device for it, because we wanted to. They didn't know the Renaissance Italy. Right? They knew it from what they read about it, and what they heard about it, and what other poets had written about it.
Verona again.
Yeah, Verona again. So that was our approach, and we're pleased that it is playing out as well as it is.
Should we go ahead and turn this to
Yeah. All right.
comments and questions?
Who's eager to kick us off with an idea or a thought?
Good morning.
Morning. Wonderful production last night. Yeah, I really appreciated the fact that the play really captured the adolescence of Romeo and Juliet. I've seen this play tens of times, and this was by far the best in terms of capturing that. And I just loved it that you do not have adolescent actors, but both Shane and Betsy really seemed to capture that. I just wondered, was that a real goal for you to bring that essence into the play?
Absolutely. I mean, the gap between the young people and their parents, the generation gap that exists between them. We wanted to suggest that there were other tensions going on, other than the Capulet Montague, and that, between parents and children, between one generation and the next. And that's always the difficulty with Romeo and Juliet, because you need the maturity to understand this language and the technical capacity to produce it and present it clearly on an outdoor stage. Which is outdoors with fireworks and motorcycles, all those very Verona-like presences, and that's hard to do. I mean, if you make a film, you can get actual kids, as Zeffirelli did, as Baz Luhrmann did with his version in the late '90s with Leonardo and
Claire Danes.
Claire Danes, right? But a camera's this far away, and you don't have to present fully, the language to be heard in a large theater. That tends to be an older actor, with more ability and capacity. So to get the match between that, the need for that, and to look young enough to be believable there is always a challenge, and we're very happy. I mean, I think Betsy in particular
Fantastic.
is extraordinary with this. She really looks like she's not even 14.
She embodies like every movement of her body, the set of her shoulders, the looks on her face, her hand gestures are
Right.
so girlish, very much in comparison to the Via de Lesseps, if you saw Shakespeare in Love, where Viola is a woman, and Betsy is a woman with a baby. If you were here yesterday, right, she's very young still from my perspective, but yet a full-grown woman, and that Juliet last night is a girl, no
Yes.
question.
That makes Juliet one of Shakespeare's most challenging roles, really. You have to be old enough to get it. It's among the most lines for any character. Rosalind is the most, but it's in the top 5. Very challenging role, but got to be 13.
Yes, I relate Juliet to Hamlet in
Yeah.
one particular regard. That even with the most extreme emotional and mental conditions, most psychologically monstrous, nightmarish circumstances, she's able to think her way through what she's doing. She's able to separate herself from her emotions enough to reason and think her way through it and make her decisions. Romeo, after the killing of Mercutio, is largely a victim of what happens next, what happens next, what
Pushed
happens
by
next.
tides.
Yes.
Mhm.
Whereas Juliet
Fortune's
seizes
school, right?
control. Yeah, Juliet seizes control of her life.
Yeah. They both have arcs, but she really drives the story. This is Juliet's play.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Next question.
That's wonderful.
We run
Over
around
here, there's 2 on this side.
I'm not an English major, but I married one.
Good choice.
However,
I commend you.
I'm not sure if it's called a prologue or not, but the gentleman who introduced
Yeah, that's the prologue. You got it.
I found myself watching him watch them. Was that Shakespeare's point? Was he our eyes in terms of the mass people? What was that vehicle within the play seemed quite unique. Even though the actor played a number of other roles, he played that role, throughout. So I'm just curious as to what the purpose and.
Sure. Thank you very much. There's a couple of things on that. It worked on a couple of levels for us whether it worked is up to you, but whether in our process, what we were attempting here was that certainly it was a bow to doing the theater at the time. And if you see Shakespeare in Love, you really see aspects of this when backstage, well, I can do this. I'll take this. Give me a hat. I'll play this. And it was like all hands on deck, make the story happen. And there was an aspect of that and him being a protean sort of presence. But here's the other idea, and I don't want to talk too much about this because I think it's an idea that we would hope people discover in the play, absorb, realize within it. But there are three lovers in this play. You know, there's Romeo and there's Juliet. There's I suppose there's others that you don't see, but there is another one that you see, and that's death. Death hovers on everything that happens in this play. And you're told that from the beginning. You're told how it's going to end. And the mark of some success, I think, in this play, and it's certainly for me, it's always been, yes, I know how it's going to end, but maybe tonight she'll wake up a moment earlier.
Or maybe Romeo will get there and change his mind about the poison and, you know,
Yes.
something might
So if we're
happen.
really present with that, because that's what it is, isn't it? In the theater, an audience experiences action and emotion with the actors. They are in the play. And I think that the very idea of wake up is connected to the humanism of art itself, that something might happen to awaken the human mind to become enlightened and awaken all the senses to a better life, you know, by virtue of the stories that we tell each other about our life, that somehow it can be better. And these two ideals of love might somehow not perish, you know, but continue. We know it can't be that way, but if we are somehow taken to that place by the virtue of the drama itself and the story itself, the beauty of the story, the passion of the story, and the pathos of realizing again how brief this candle is, how mortal we all are, and how that other lover awaits us. You know, that was the idea. So he's in black. He observes when scenes that a victim is playing, waiting.
Great. Our next question's back here.
Morning, Jim.
Hey, Miles.
How's it going?
Good.
Just wanted to reassure you that you need not have any worries about the effectiveness of your production. The pacing, I've seen some pretty ponderous Romeo and Juliets, but the pacing in yours was consistent, and I was startled when intermission came, how quickly it came. I believe that's Act 3, Scene 1, when Mercutio and Tybalt die, and so the pacing, there was a momentum for the play that was constantly just right, I thought, and I'm guessing that's probably an issue in Romeo and Juliet, given that I've seen some pretty ponderous versions of it. And I felt that the second half continued with that momentum. So you seem to have instilled in your actors the importance of, while doing justice to the lines, keeping the momentum of the play. Because I've seen productions where after Mercutio has died, that the play, for me anyway, on an emotional level, was pretty much over with. And that certainly wasn't the case in this production. That had a great deal to do with your two lead actors, of course. And I'll give this up in a moment, I promise. John Preston's one of my all-time favorite actors. I first started seeing his work at Alabama Shakespeare in the late 90s. And so I was thrilled when he turned up here a few years ago. And I thought his Capulet was the most human I've ever seen.
I agree.
I've never seen him more engaging than the way John Preston portrayed him. And therefore that made his moments of anger all the more hard to deal with. I was trying to find a hiding place last night when he was teeing off on Juliet, and I didn't really want to crawl under the seats in front of me, but I thought about it anyway. But anyway, thank you for sensational production, as always.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Miles. Thank you very much.
you.
That's very kind. You know, the thing about the pacing is it's not just because we need things to be continually engaging, and in a time when attention spans are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. You know, it's a 3-hour play. Seems like a mountain you have to climb or something. You know, can't seem that way if it's successful, but suddenness of events is key to everything in Romeo and Juliet. It's the engine of fate in this play. Suddenness and chance. I mean, you think about it over and over and over. The one thing doesn't happen, and the whole tragedy just passes them by. That doesn't occur. If Benvolio doesn't insist that he look upon other beauties, you know, and you'll get over this infatuation with Rosaline. And at that moment, a servant who with a invitation list happens to ask this particular person on the street. Well, there are only 2 on stage, but still, can you
Presume it's
read?
a street, yeah.
You know, and there he reads that Rosaline's going to be there. You know, like chance, pure chance.
Or why came you between us? I was hurt under your arm.
Suddenness of event and speed. And that time itself, in terms of that pace, begins to take over. Really, I think after the 2 events, the circumscribed beauty of the dance itself and the sonnet that they create, which is a kind of moment out of time, which was like West Side Story. Tony meets Maria, you know, at the dance. Everything goes into soft focus behind them. That's falling in love at first sight. And then that exquisite garden balcony scene, you know, where there's no world. It's behind the wall, within the orchard walls, under the cover of trees and night. And then from that moment on, time, or that black suited character, enters back in and takes over the governance of the events of their life.
You know, the early moderns believed in fortune, and you'll hear that word all the time, right? Romeo says, "I am fortune's fool," but it's throughout the play. You know, the TV show Wheel of Fortune. That's where it comes
Yeah.
from. They believe that Lady Fortune had her wheel, and at one point you can be on the side and you come up, and life is good, and in just a moment you go down. The wheel moves.
And it's sort of inevitable, this evolution of fortune. Okay, well, there's one here, and then there's a gentleman here in the front.
I have a question about because this play is so well known. It's impossible to do every line. I was wondering what cuts you made and which textual choices you used, and your reasons for some of those.
Sure. Well, you know, if you went up to see a play in 1595, you know, in London,
Not a problem with Cymbeline, you know.
well, a lot of trouble to get to the theater. Even more back in the Globe days, you know, have to hire a boatman to get you over there. I think they wanted to be in the theater for 4 hours, you know, to get their money's worth. And London, as Kate was saying, audience Kate was saying, was sonnet crazy, I think, in the 1595, 96 period. I mean, that was, so there's a lot of moments in the play where the sonnet just sort of takes over for a while longer, you know, that more than we need, really, having established a dramatic effect. And primarily it's always about propelling action, which is why in the staging architecture of the play, there's usually an overlap of characters, you know, something that the audience completely, you know, gives you, you know, because those are the conditions of the form. So, and yet I have to say Romeo and Juliet is so beautifully written from start to finish and so tight. There's nothing extra in it, really. And it was hard to make cuts. We cut, I would say, probably 25 to 30 minutes out of the running time. Most of them were internal cuts. Most of them were elaborations on a conceit or image already established. Many we left in. Juliet convinces Friar Lawrence that yes, she has the strength to do this. I'll do this. I'll lie in a shroud. I'll do this. I'll do this. Bringing up the very things that are going to happen. But says it a couple of times, which seemed to be important to me in this context, because he has to know with certainty that this not even 14-year-old girl is going to have the fortitude to shut the door and everybody in her house and take this potion, which, by the way, she learned she has to do at night early, when she gets back home, a change of plan. So there were decisions based on what keeps the play propelled forward, what can we lose in his elaboration of certain conceits, and what would make it still seem as though everything was there.
Great. One down here, and then I'll come to the front.
Something I've never really seen before, I wish you'd comment on, if you would, is the great range of emotion, very great highs and very, very great lows that just transcend one into the other and back and forth. And I don't know why I'd never seen that so much before, but was that an emphasis of yours?
It's an emphasis of Shakespeare's. I think that look, young people live extreme lives,
Volatile.
and they know the world is a mess, and they know it has to be fixed, and it starts with them, in their life. I think that's something every one of us had when we were young. And if we are young of heart and mind, hopefully we still have that, the sense that it can be better and should be better. And this is one of the ways it can be. But they are both all in, with each other. And there are contributing things to this tragedy that compress it and thus heighten the tension. The fact that things are secret, kept from other people. Everybody's part of that, so that when it explodes, it's like it's been in a pressure cooker anyway. But it's all or nothing for them. And that extreme condition gives us the tragedy. And it's a tragedy because it's everybody's tragedy in Verona. Everybody had a hand in that strange trajectory of events that turned into their deaths.
Hold on. We're taping, so we on the mic.
Yeah, we're seeing so many suicides of young people today, and
Yes.
and it's that same kind of thing.
Yes, the nature of that sort of despair, existential despair
Yeah.
and rejection.
It was this gentleman in the white hat, Kate.
My question was actually just asked recently, so I was going to ask about the cutting and such. But I will say, I'm not an expert on this play by any means. I've seen it once, and I saw it here for the 50th anniversary. And I know my family had not seen it. We watched it. We really enjoyed the first half back then. And then it just slogged through the whole second half. And we're just so every time you'd say Romeo and Juliet to us, the whole family would be like, oh, God. Last night, the second half was by far my favorite part of the show. It was just watching this spiral out of control to the point where I could see why they weren't just dumb kids committing suicide. It was like they had no other choices. And I think a lot of that was because of the secondary characters and the friar and how important he was to the show. When you're looking at it, how much do you look at those secondary characters and say, these people are really, really important? And if we just say, well, it's Romeo and Juliet and they do your lines, we'll be fine. They made a huge impact.
It's all the difference for me. Yeah, I think that's the verisimilitude of the world. If there's one false note, in anybody up there in a story like this, it casts the whole thing into another realm that is not good. It's everything to me. And also, if it's not a full world with believable, even the watch characters, the servants, everything, we find ourselves in all of those people, and in every circumstance, domestic or otherwise. It's not that we shouldn't be compelled to be Romeo or Juliet and make that identification. We should be invited into and find ourselves in the world that they live in. And that every character on the stage has a part of that, opening the door and bringing us in.
I thought, just a comment before we turn here, that Paris found very deep humanity in this production. And this is often a character that's easy not to sympathize with. He's kind of busting in here. He's looking for a rich young wife. You can not like Paris, but this Paris didn't have to mourn Juliet's passing the way he did. And it was very moving, I thought, and I felt the sincerity of his portrayal of Paris. And that was a very nice revelation for me.
Paris does nothing wrong.
He's a good guy.
He does everything right and plays by the rules, and
asks her father. He wants to court her. It's the dad who rushes things and keeps changing the conditions. Capulet himself, although he's an older person, is quite volatile. So you can see where his daughter gets it from.
That's right. I was going to say, her dad does rush things, changes his mind, very, like that.
And
she does the same thing.
She does the same thing. I mean, believe me, I have a daughter who's now 21, and she is the living image of her father. And always has been from the moment she was born. So this, to me, I feel this connection very deeply.
Let's give Capulet his due, though. I mean, an early modern father's duty was to get his daughter well married. He's done exactly what he's supposed to do, provided a good match for her. So his frustration and anger makes a lot of sense.
It really does.
So I wanted to tell you I appreciate something, and then I have a question for you. So we were talking about the cutting. I'm now a high school teacher, but I taught 9th grade English for 28 years.
Woo!
Props to a lot of Romeo and Juliet, I bet.
I have absolutely no questions about what you cut because I know exactly what you cut.
You know every line.
And so I wanted to thank you for some of the things that you I do know every line. Sorry. Some of the things you left in that are frequently cut. I loved that you did not cut any of what to me are the essential things that show motivation, such as and cause and effect, such as Friar Lawrence's exceptionally long speech about, oh, it's morning, let's talk about the gods of dawn. But you left in the part about the flowers. So we have a reason why he can make this potion.
Special potion.
It's so often cut. And thank you for leaving it in. Thank you for leaving in the tackled stare, the chords. Because the nurse has now a reason to come into the room, and we have that whole. I loved that scene. The
Although those chords scared me, every time he climbs down them, it makes me nervous.
They were scary, yes, but I loved that scene.
Okay, good.
So thank you for leaving in the cause and effect, because so often those are cut. Now here's my question. Obviously, I have read this over and over and over and over and over, and corrected pronunciation millions of times, and I've seen it many times, and I love it. I'm still in love with this play, even as much as I am familiar with it. Mercutio is my favorite character just because he can be interpreted so many ways, and I have seen him as sexy. I have seen him done as very, very funny and so forth. So, last night, I witnessed probably the angriest Mercutio I have ever seen. And I can see how it could be interpreted that way. But my question is, was that more you, or was that more the actor, or who made that decision to have a very volatile, he's volatile anyway, a very angry Mercutio?
We collaborated on that. Jeb Burris, a terrific actor, has actually played Mercutio before. So he came into it, with a body of feeling about it, and it was my idea to take him in a slightly different direction, manic depressive, which we would recognize as that these extreme highs and lows of a character who is angry. He's angry about losing Romeo. He's angry about losing Romeo to to women. He wants him back. He seems to distrust women. He seems to be angry about their power over men. He certainly seems to be angry about Rosaline's power over Romeo, taking Romeo away from Romeo. And, but I think this could all be a projection of another anger, an anger, a self-lacerating, self-loathing, expressive, artistic personality. We talked a little bit about Kurt Cobain. We talked a little bit about punk musicians. We talked a little bit about Kerouac and On the Road, and it's as if he's losing Dean Moriarty or something, you know. We talked about his anger at at those uptown people, Tybalt, and their displays of wealth and their
Prince of
as if
Cats.
they're all from the Upper East Side, but they're all living down in the village as a kind of rejection of all of that now. We talked about all of those things, which are all things that brings Mercutio closer to our own time, certainly. And he has that long speech, another long speech in not the Mab speech, a famous speech, which we saw as a speech that has a set start that becomes an improvisation and then becomes his own nightmare as it gets in these involutions of it, gets wrapped up in it. The spinner's webs that he talks about become literal for him. He gets all
And only
wrapped
Romeo
up
can
in it.
pull him out.
And only Romeo can pull him out, and that's what he's missing. You know, he's missing his friend, and he wants him back. So we talked about all of those things with Mercutio, and of course, this play is structured as a comedy in its first act until Mercutio's death, and that's the pivot point, and that's where it turns into the Act 2 tragedy, you know, which either works or doesn't. But it does do that. So those are the things that we saw as the Mercutio for this production. When he talks in Act 3, Scene 1, before Tybalt encounters him, we see him criticizing Benvolio for all the things that are really himself. You know, and I think that those guys finally realize, oh, he hates himself. You know, he hates himself, and that was where the ground from which we built this.
Thank you. And here in the center.
There's a technique that Shakespeare uses in a lot of plays, and I noticed it again yesterday in the middle, and particularly towards the end. And it's kind of counterintuitive, and as a director, perhaps you can help us work through it. He'll have a series of actions performed on the stage, and then a judge or a king or a new character will come on, and somebody on the stage will explain to the new character exactly what we've just witnessed as an audience. So first he shows you, then he tells you. I mean, this breaks all the rules of creative writing. And yet, the funny thing is, I don't see those summations being cut in plays, and I don't think they should be, because I'm still interested, actually, in the narration of the events that I've just witnessed, but I don't quite know why.
Excellent question.
Good question. Yes, I think in this case, another thing we did not cut is the long speech of the Friar Lawrence's when he tells the assembled around the tomb what we all already know. You know, and it's a faithful rendition of exactly what has happened. But that's where the play conforms to the rules of tragedy, in that all have to fully know intellectually, not just emotionally, their involvement in what happened. So there are a couple of reasons, I think, for this process. It was also used very much in Restoration theater. Those are not, another 4-act, 5-hour, plays, which I sometimes think, well, people came and left, during the show. So you had to have somebody up there always telling them what has happened so they can kind of catch up.
I actually really do think that's part of it.
Yeah.
The play-going atmosphere was simply more casual. People didn't come and sit in a seat and quietly watch a play.
Yeah.
They came to a theater as part of a social outing, to see and be seen, to hear the play,
Having
to
an
get a
affair
drink,
offstage,
to meet a prostitute, right? I mean, it was a raucous kind of rock concert atmosphere.
So I think but here though, I think we're really interested to see, oh, we know this, but how will that person respond to this? And I think there's a fulfillment of story in that.
Plus, it keeps us focused. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'd like to comment on the actor at the beginning who did the prologue for us, if you will, and you gave your couple of reasonings as to his purpose. But I'd like to present a third one to you that I personally felt on that. And that is, and yes, of course, he does tell us the ending of this tragic story. And what I found with his presence on stage throughout was that he reminded us that we're actually He's like our witness, and we're actually there witnessing this whole story in front of him. And that's what I found his purpose to be.
Yeah, he is us. His relationship in the play is primarily the one with us. You know, he brings us in. Come with me to Fair Verona, where we lay our scene.
He is also the memento mori, which is a Latin phrase which means remember that you must die. And it was a very important trope through this entire period. People had bedsteads with skulls carved on them, and rings. And I mean, it was just something that, I mean, doesn't Capulet say, remember we are born to die? Which is basically the phrase memento mori. And so
Yeah,
he's that
even
too.
the nurse too.
Mhm.
When Romeo was hysterical, trying to comfort him, uses the phrase, "No, death is the end of all." You know, and over and over and over, death is. They say it. They use it. They remind themselves of it, and think, like all of us, that it's a long way off.
I believe, isn't this a
Yeah,
tidbit
you're
that this
gonna
is
say,
the
and
play
yes,
that has the most mentions
mentions of
of
death.
the form of the word death, die,
Yep.
dead, you know, that those cognates of that word. This is the play that hammers it home.
Yep.
There's
over
another thing
and over
about that character that I wanted to say. I think to me, Shakespeare was in love with the idea of people watching a play. And he puts that conceit in plays over and over and over, where people are witnessing others, and as you like it, they're behind. You know, as you like it, as the speech, all the world's a stage. But he puts actors within
much
stories,
to do about nothing.
role
Well,
players.
you're going to see the midsummer, perhaps. Puck says, "I'll be an auditor and an actor too, perhaps. I'll be an auditor." He's the witness. He's watching.
And it's also an idea I got from the Midsummer I saw when I was very young. The famous Peter Brook white
Oh.
box version, where the RSC actors were sort of hovering and watching all the
Yeah.
time. And
I
that was
think-
another vacuum the brain moment for me.
Right. We have time for one more question before we need 5 minutes for a break between
Is
the
there-
two seminars.
I'm going to hold for just 1 second. Is there someone who hasn't gotten a chance to speak? I'd like to go there. Yeah. Anyone exercising this morning?
I'm no expert on any of this, so
That
this
is
may
just
be
fine.
to an Elizabethan audience, how much more credible would the idea have been that somebody could take a potion and appear dead for 2 days?
I think quite credible, actually.
You know, there's an actual mixture that does this. I mean, I didn't know this. It was looked up by our dramaturg, and I can't remember the names, but there are things that actually do this.
Mimic
So
death.
it's not out of the blue
What
in
is it?
fantasy land.
Tetrodotoxin, says one patron here. I mean, and think about it. In the early modern period, they didn't have heart monitors, pulse monitors. If someone was cold and stiff, and if their breathing was so shallow that it was undiscernible, right? Often people would check for breathing by putting a mirror, a piece of a polished metal in
We
front
see
of
that in
someone's mouth,
Lear.
and you see it in Lear. And so death was hard to detect, and a deep coma is in fact mimicking death. And so certainly there are chemicals that can send us into a coma that way.
They had a lot of interesting beliefs about poison. John Webster, you heard that name in Shakespeare in Love, has a play with the poison Bible, right? The idea of even touching this. There's also poison painting. You could look at a painting and it could kill you. So they had a lot of interesting beliefs about poison.
Right. Powerful stuff, poison, love and death, parents and children. We get it all in Romeo and Juliet. So thank you, Jim, for bringing us this wonderful production.
And thank you all for coming. We're going to reconvene in 5 minutes for Treasure Island. We'll have the director with us as well. Thank you, everyone.